Hello everybody, you're also welcome to the channel of Eclectic Chessa. If this is not your first time of being here, thank you so much for coming back. Truly, you guys know that I always appreciate it when you guys return. However, if this is your first time of being here, and I so heartily welcome you as well. I actually urge you to stick around because there's always a lot of fun over here. Either way, very interesting, so do stick around. You're welcome. Welcome to the family. Sit down and relax, and I promise you it'll be worth the listen. My name is Vanessa Danza Erajachewa, and today I will bring you the topic of the Scramble for Africa. So if you like this type of videos, just comment in the comments below. Let me know what your thoughts are. Let me know what you're thinking. I really like to know your opinions on this one. You can like this video, you can share it, you can give this a big thumbs up and show some love. And until then, you can just enjoy the story, and I'll see you in a bit. Bye.
Today, we will be discussing the Scramble for Africa, which took place during the new imperialism between 1881 and 1914, and its impact yet still. So do buckle up, ladies and gentlemen, it's going to be a bumpy ride through history. Okay, so we all know that colonization of Africa was part of a global European process that reached all the continents of the world. However, historians argue that the Russian imperial conquest of the African continent by the European powers started with King Leopold II of Belgium. The focus of this lesson will be on the causes and results of European colonization of the African continent. King Leopold II of Belgium was responsible for the deaths and mutilation of 10 million Congolese Africans during the late 1800s. The spoils of modern-day Belgium owes much to the people of the Congo River Basin. In a testament to the hideous brutality of the European colonial era and imperialism in its finest form, during the 1880s, when Europe was busy dividing up the continent of Africa like a vast chocolate cake, King Leopold II of Belgium laid personal claim to the largely uncharted Congo Free State. The 905,000 square miles, 76 times larger than Belgium, of African rainforest held a vast fortune in rubber plantations, a commodity in high demand in the late 19th century industrial Europe. In 1876, Leopold formed a philanthropic organization called Association Internationale Africaine, which means International African Association, and became its single shareholder. Under the disguise of missionary work and westernization, or so-called civilization of African people, Leopold II used the International African Association to further his ambitions of empire building in the hope of bringing international prestige to the relatively small Belgium. In reality, The International African Association was a vehicle to enslave the people of the Congo River Basin and enrich Leopold II. For 23 years, Leopold II ruled the Congo from 1885 to 1908, and he massacred at least 10 million Africans by cutting off their hands, legs, and genitals, flogging them to the death, starving them into forced labor, holding children ransom, and burning villages. The ironic part of this story is that Leopold II committed these atrocities by not even setting foot in the Congo. The Royal Museum for Central Africa began as a temporary exhibition in 1897 in Tervuren, Belgium, where Leopold had his country estate. The most talked about part of the exhibition was a human zoo, a mock African village set up in the estate woods and ponds. King Leopold, who never set foot in the Congo, imported 267 Congolese men, women, and children to Tervuren and displayed them behind a fence like animals in the zoo. Now, due to the worldwide insufficiency of world knowledge, the size and abilities of Africa as a continent was majorly undermined and oversimplified. Before colonization, Africa was characterized by widespread flexibility in terms of movement, daily lifestyles, and governance. Before colonization, however, there were many forms of government in Africa, ranging from powerful empires to decentralized groups of pastoralists and hunters. The reason for African colonization was mainly economic, political, and religious. During this time of colonization, an economic depression was occurring in Europe, and powerful countries such as Germany, France, and Great Britain were losing money. Africa seemed to be out of harm's way and had an abundance of raw materials from which Europe could make money from. Due to cheap labor of Africans, Europeans easily acquired products like oil, ivory, rubber, palm oil, cotton, gum, and wood. These products became of greater significance due to the emergence of the Industrial Revolution. Africa's colonization was also a result of European rivalries, where Britain and France had been in dispute since the 100 Years' War. These countries became involved in a race to acquire more territory on the African continent, but this race was open to all European countries. The Conference of Berlin began in 1884 at the request of Portugal, when German Chancellor Otto von Bismarck called together the major Western powers of the world to negotiate questions and end confusion over the control of Africa. The countries represented at the time included Austria-Hungary, Belgium, Denmark, France, Germany, Great Britain, Italy, the Netherlands, Portugal, Russia, Spain, and Sweden, Norway, Turkey, and the United States of America. Of these 14 nations, France, Germany, Great Britain, and Portugal were the major players in the conference, controlling most of colonial Africa at the time. They were competing for power within European power politics. One way to demonstrate national superiority was through the acquisition of territories around the world, including Africa. Another reason for European interest in Africa besides our natural resources is the industrialization when major social problems grew in Europe: unemployment, homelessness, social displacement from rural areas, poverty, and etc. These social problems developed partly because not all people could be absorbed by the new capitalist industries. Europe saw the colonization of Africa as an opportunity to acquire a surplus population, so more colonies were created. With this invasion, many European countries saw Africa as being available to their disposal. However, several disputes took place regarding which European country would colonize a specific African country. Thus, in 1884, Portugal proposed a conference in which these 14 countries would meet in Berlin regarding the division of Africa without the presence of Africa. The initial task of the conference was to agree that the Congo River and Niger River mouths and basins would be considered neutral and open to trade. Despite its neutrality, parts of the Congo Basin became a personal kingdom, private property, for Belgium's King Leopold II, and under his rule, over half of the region's population died. At the time of the conference, only the coastal areas of Africa were colonized by the European powers. At the Berlin Conference, the European colonial powers scrambled to gain control over the interior part of the continent. The conference lasted until February 26, 1885, a 3-month period where colonial powers haggled over geometric boundaries in the interior of the continent, disregarding the cultural and linguistic boundaries already established by the African population. What ultimately resulted was a hodgepodge of geometric boundaries that divided Africa into 50 irregular countries. Before the colonization of Rwanda, there was no distinction between the Tutsi and Hutus. They were one people, more or less, the same culturally and linguistically. The only difference between the two was that the Hutu were mostly agriculturalists and Tutsi were cattle breeders. The Belgians separated the people of Rwanda into these two races, even when they did not know the original tribes of the people. The Tutsis were considered the superior race because of their European-like features. Ethnicity in Rwanda then became a matter of racial and political classification. Colonial engineering and segregation was brought into Rwanda at this time because the Belgians chose the Tutsi as a superior race and discriminated against the Hutu, which ultimately led to the genocide of 800,000 people within 100 days in 1994. A civil war that would have never existed between basically identical ethnic groups without colonial engineering to divide and conquer. The tensions between Hutus and Tutsis prove just how devastating and powerful the idea of ethnic superiority and therefore racism can be. The European countries were able to colonize African countries rapidly because there were rivalries between African leaders. These kings and chiefs were competing with each other to be the richest and most powerful within their tribes. During these rivalries, European leaders would take advantage of the situation and persuaded some leaders to be on their side to fight against other leaders. Natural disasters also played a big role in the rapid and easy colonization of Africa. In 1895, a serious drought reached many regions in Africa, which was caused by a sudden decline in rainfall. Hardly any crops were produced, and the food shortage which followed caused the death of many people and animals. Little crops that were produced were destroyed by a plague of grasshoppers. In addition to this plague, the cattle plague broke out during the 1890s, which killed cattle, sheep, and goats. This led to even more deaths of animals and people, and due to their physical weakness, they were unable to fight against European powers. European powers could easily take control of any source of land by using force and violence. They accomplished this by using more powerful weapons and had the advantage of the newly invented machine gun called the Maxim gun, which was invented in the 1880s. This gun could fire 11 bullets per second and outdid the weapons that the African had. African armies did not manage to get hold of the European weapons because it was not sold to them. Thus, Africans were at a military disadvantage. An outbreak of new diseases made an appearance during the late 1890s, and the first one was a range of smallpox epidemics. The Europeans who were already in Africa had developed immunity to these diseases due to past experiences of these outbreaks in Europe. The African population had no immunity or resistance to these diseases and thus weakened the African population. A large number of African population thus died out or became too weak to fight back. Decades after the European powers carved up the African continent for their own imperial needs, Africa is undergoing a new wave of resource and strategic exploitation. Some are calling it the new Scramble for Africa. The United States is increasing its footprint across Africa with AFRICAINE. Fighting terrorism and ensuring stability are the trumpeted motivations. Resource security is a more hushed objective. The new battle for Africa does not deploy strong-arm tactics. However, it's now a soft power game, economic and humanitarian aid, portraying the image of paternalism over partnership, in turn decreasing tourism that would help economic growth, so-called interest-free loans, preferential trade agreements, and investments in infrastructure, and etc. These are all used as a currency across a continent that is, for the world's established and emerging powers, seemingly up for grabs. We'll prove this to you that there is still a big motivation to re-scramble Africa. Simple example, the world map we use in schools today. The map most commonly used in the world is a Mercator map designed in 1569. This is a map that we see in classrooms all over the world. This is also the map that formulates our basic ideas of what our planet looks like. In fact, Even Google Maps uses this Mercator map. To be completely honest, it is a convenient map. The latitudes and longitudes are straight lines that intersect perpendicularly. The rectangular shape is nice and compact for printing, and the shapes of the countries are well defined. However, the one thing this map does not get right is the relative sizes of the countries. The countries near the poles are portrayed as being much larger than they really are. Take a good look at the map. Go on. Really look at it. North America seems larger than Africa. Scandinavian countries are larger than India, and Alaska looks bigger than Brazil. Greenland appears to be a large sparse island big enough to rival Africa. This is the map you've been growing up with, so surely it isn't that much of a lie, right? How bad could the disparity really be? The answer is extremely bad. Please allow me to show you the real world. Let's first address the elephant in the room, Africa. In reality, Africa is actually huge. It is 3 times the size of North America. Despite the fact that in the Mercator map, North America looks larger. You can fit the USA, India, Europe, and China into Africa. Then there is the Greenland issue. Greenland's ratio is way off. On the Mercator map, it looks as big as Africa, but in truth, it is only 1/14 of Africa's size. Greenland is nowhere near the massiveness of Africa. It is tinier than the Democratic Republic of Congo, just a single one of Africa's 54 nations. The enlargement of the northern areas is where the real issue lies. The map that we use today was made in the era of colonial expansion. Western imperialism reigned and European nations scrambled to force as many countries into submission as possible. During this mad rush to conquer the wealth of the world, political correctness was the last thing on their mind. Europeans felt the most comfortable with choosing one that inflated their countries to match the size of their egos. It's easy to equate bigger things as more important and more powerful than smaller things. It's easy to think that countries in the center of the map are metaphorically the center of the world. How could Europeans resist the temptation? As we hear so often, the victors write the history books and apparently they also draw the maps. I'm not saying that we should all change our maps overnight, as that would be a bit pointless. However, what we can do is remember how arbitrary maps truly are. Everybody should know that they don't reflect the truth, but rather the history of how our accepted truths came to be.
Well, it seems as though we have reached the end of this video. I hope you liked it, I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you learned quite a bit because it was kind of the point. If you have any more comments or you have any more questions, just leave them in the comments box below and I will try to answer them for you. Until then, you can just take care of yourselves, be kind to one another, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.